Welcome back to another episode of The Last Safe Space. This is a Music Venue Trust podcast. It is data-driven, no-nonsense, straight talking, and I'm joined today by my lovely colleagues and co-hosts, Jay and also Lloyd, who look after the whole of England, basically.
You do.
Your coordinators for England. We're just going to be diving a little bit into your work and, you know, what every day looks like for you, you know, the challenges that you've been facing recently with, you know, the venues that you're supporting. Would it be possible just to kind of explain what you've been covering over the last few months?
Well, yeah. I mean, the whole gamut of challenges that land on the emergency response service door.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen venues with financial challenges, neighbour noise complaints, redevelopment and development next to existing grassroots music venues. We could talk all day about agent of change. Plainly PRS challenges. We could, later on, I suspect you'll talk to our colleague Gareth all about the lovely world of PRS and rights management. People with kind of small challenges. Sometimes people come to the emergency response service with a question or a challenge that's quite easily solved. You know, we need to know where that piece of funding is, or we need to know where that piece of legislation is, or we need to kind of ask one of our team of amazing gurus about a question or like a specific piece of their work. Sometimes it's ginormous pieces of work. I mean, we'll talk to Lloyd in a bit, but Lloyd's got a planning case somewhere in the UK, which is now how long has it been going?
13th edition of it came through yesterday. So yeah, that one's
13 editions.
Yeah, 13. I think it's 13 attempts to build blocks of flats next to a venue.
Blimey. And what happens with something like that? Do they just make tiny tweaks and then just resubmit the application?
Basically, yeah. I mean, in this particular case, the venue is kind of surrounded by a horseshoe of potential developments, and it's not necessarily about there can't be flats next to the development, but it's just the repeated attempts to push through planning applications without making sure that the people who live in those flats will not be disturbed by the noise, and acknowledging the fact that the venue is pre-existing in the area and is going to make noise in order to survive. So these things can be symbiotic, but often developers won't attempt to make them that way.
So realistically, is that what like an average day could look like for both of you? Is just, objecting to planning applications, endless phone calls with local government, is that what you're doing day to day?
I don't think there isn't really an average day, is there? Yeah. It's pretty varied. Like there's one recently that I'm looking into, which is about how to help a venue that's literally in a cave deal with its fire regs, which is quite a novel one. And then there's other one, then there's venues on boats and about planning around that, and there's all kinds of interesting things. Sometimes people just want help advised on what bookings to make. And
I mean, you sort of know what your day's going to be first thing in the morning when the Bialetti is on the stove brewing its first coffee, and then something can land that completely reshapes your day, something really significant, potential venue closer, and then you sort of have to re-sculpt your day around that significant thing that could be time sensitive. We've had venues that have had fires, where plainly that's something that needs support straight away. Some of the cases like Lloyd's work on with that venue go on for years.
I mean, I'm just thinking about all the times that on a Friday afternoon you've messaged me and been like, I'm really sorry, but we need to put out a public statement right now. And I'm like, oh boy, as you're sort of like trying to wind down towards the weekend, and then something massive hits, and it can often scupper your weekend as well, can't it?
Yeah, the big chunk of the work's reactive for sure.
But it's not all doom and gloom, is it? Because sometimes a venue will have a really class idea for a festival with a programme of events that will not only help the venue invest in its infrastructure through the funding, but support bands in the area and do exactly what venues are there to do. And those supporting creative ideas and working in a positive sense is as much part of the job as firefighting when things are going wrong.
Can you think of any sort of like key wins recently?
My mind is immediately gone. Well, the fact that this venue that I mentioned before with the huge amount of planning applications, the fact that it has got to 13 is because 11 or 12 previous ones have been knocked back in order to protect the venue. So that's a positive. There's been other ones where there have been a few cases, not to constantly slag off developers, where they have been pretty proactive in trying to make sure that they're doing things right. And there's a couple of cases that we're working on at the minute where developers are going to pretty decent lengths to try and make sure that they do the right noise mitigation measures and things like that. So in a planning sense, that's really positive. We're seeing a lot more venues thinking cooperatively and working together within their city with other venues in the areas that they're based to present as a unified front to the council and try and improve relationships with local authorities and come up with some really creative ideas to promote themselves to incoming students and residents and things like that. So there's a lot of that kind of community mindset it's playing quite a prevalent role in the day-to-day operation of venues at the moment, which is always a positive as well, I would say.
Yeah, and we're seeing people have successful funding applications all the time that enables them to do really significant, amazing work that they might not have been able to do otherwise. The best thing about the job, literally the best thing about the job is having those conversations with the operators. I'm in awe of those people. They're beautiful, gorgeous, thoroughly, purely driven, amazing human beings who do incredible work under often kind of difficult circumstances. And speaking to those people about the work they're doing and the artists they're able to put on, that's like the best bit of it.
That's what it's all about, isn't it, really? It's making sure that they can continue and thrive.
Totally.
Also, just back on the planning thing a second, it's not that we're anti-planning as a charity, right?
No.
It's more that we're responsible planning, because I feel like, people think that we're putting in these objections all the time, that we just don't want anything built next to a venue. That's not it.
It's not NIMBYism. It's the idea of having housing near venues is a positive, because these are all potential members of the community that can use the venues, and it's very rare that you'll find a venue operator who, it's never happened to me anyway, who is like hardline anti-housing. There's a housing crisis that needs to be solved, but it is a case of, well, let's make sure those houses are decent so that not only do they provide adequate living spaces for people, but also these people can live there and benefit from pre-existing good things in the area that potentially drew them there in the first place, such as a thriving nightlife or lots of things to do in your spare time. There's no point sitting in a flat on your own with nothing around you all day, is there?
No, I don't think that would be very good fun. But I think, I was having an interesting conversation with Sophie earlier, and she was saying that a developer was saying that these people that lived in a flat just had to keep their windows shut in order to get better soundproofing. And it was described as like being oppressive, like an oppressive rule to insinuate that someone would have to just live with their windows shut all the time.
Yeah, it's also unenforceable.
It's not enforceable. Yeah.
Because
you can't tell someone they can't have fresh air going through their flat. That's crazy. But I think it's just really important to reiterate that, it's about the reciprocity of making sure that everyone that's living in the flats is, coexisting comfortably, in a loving environment with people in businesses next door. They don't have to be pitted against each other by, I won't say, I don't want to put it on landlords, but they don't want to be pitted against each other for the sake of like not soundproofing properly or, not insulating a space properly or whatever.
Yeah,
so I think...
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just think we're not anti-planning. We are just pro-responsible planning.
Also pro-local and combined authorities having really robust placemaking strategies and sticking to what they said. If they've said that they believe in agent of change and they think they believe in responsible planning, then they have a responsibility to sort of follow through with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. So we've noticed a rise in local authority engagement. So some councils are being like really proactive about supporting venues, while others still treat them a bit like a nuisance. How are you finding that relationship at the moment, or those relationships?
Well, I'm from Greater Manchester, and I've got an amazing relationship with civic leaders and the local authorities and the combined authority there. I think I probably have the best of it. The people I work with on the culture teams and the nighttime teams, people involved in music, placemaking, largely on board with the goals that MVT have. We're in agreement, and those conversations are actually meaningful, and stuff happens. I have a pretty good time of it in Manchester. There's perfect being the enemy of good. there's occasional kind of bumps in the road. But I actually think there's really meaningful conversations. I know who to speak to. They're on the end of the phone. If we have a challenge or we want to work on a project that kind of furthers the goals of the charity or improves music and culture in Manchester, we can probably have those conversations. There's a bunch of things happening all the time that improve the circumstances up there.
So we'll come back to Manchester in a minute because we've got a great story to talk about.
Sure.
But obviously both of you represent the whole of England as coordinators. So does that make working with other councils difficult?
A lot of it comes down to cash and how much spend the council have per head on culture. Manchester is comparatively got a lot more money to spend than Sheffield, for example, which is where I live. But on saying that, Sheffield has a designated culture team for the first time in a number of years, and then they're making real inroads into improving the provision from the council to cultural industries in the city, including music venues. They've got specific meetings and interactions with music venues to try and help there. Rural councils is a completely different kettle of fish. They often face massive challenges around transport, getting to venues, getting back from venues late at night. Not their fault, it's not the council's fault, but it's, cuts over a long time. It's hard to put on late night buses that only 3 people are going to get on, but those 3 people would really benefit from those kind of things. But there isn't really like one terrible council that are famously hard to deal with or anything like that. But every council is different because of the circumstances that they find themselves in, and geography plays a huge role in that, I would say. It's easier with cities where there's lots of venues and things. The infrastructure is more likely to be there, on which to build.
That's a brilliant point.
It can be much more challenging in areas where, to be honest, the venues play an arguably even more important role, because they're areas where the cultural offering is comparatively limited. So the individual venues are of vital importance, but the infrastructure isn't always there to support them to the extent that it is elsewhere.
Thank you. And what's your experience working with other councils when you have such a great relationship with Manchester?
I think Lloyd's right. I think we see councils who might not be able, who have ambition they might not be able to meet. But certainly when we see exemplars like Manchester and Liverpool, and things that happen things happen in the West Midlands, I think we start to see people kind of go, quite like what they're doing, and start to kind of ask questions and want to kind of collaborate with those authorities, talk about how they went about, putting meaningful strategies together, setting up music boards. There will always be those people who are kind of out front, and we're actually seeing people kind of pick up on it and want to kind of replicate it elsewhere. So I have people from other authorities get in touch about what's happening in Manchester all the time.
So it's been a benefit then?
Totally, yeah.
That's awesome.
Be more
really
Manchester.
Cool. Yeah, good. Well, let's go on and talk about Manchester, I think. It's been making headlines recently for the way local government is supporting grassroots venues, something that you've been very closely involved with.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what's been happening and how that support has taken shape?
Sure. So this particular piece of work was one specific challenge. So business rates relief for retail and hospitality businesses reduced this year. So it used to be 75%, it's 40%. We knew that increased cost dropped on top of venues could be a closer in some cases. Big significant chunk of money that they hadn't had to find last year. So MVT did a series of things. We wrote to every council and said, listen, you have discretionary powers to hand out business rates relief, and we encouraged all the MVA members to do the same. In Manchester, I had a bunch of the venues get in touch saying, this is bad news for us. It's quite a lot of money. 35% of business rates suddenly I've got to find from somewhere. What shall I do? So these are the people you should write to. Concurrently with that, a report was being written in Manchester called Manchester Music in the City. Essentially, they'd spoken to a big chunk of grassroots music venues operators in the city region, not across Greater Manchester, so in the city, and essentially said, what's your experience like? What are the challenges? Those people fed back. In amongst that was like, we could really do with something happening around business rates relief. The recommendations, I was on the steering group for that report. Recommendations were made, one of which was if you can, you should probably find some money down the back of the couch to do something about business rates relief. Manchester City Council actually did it. They found the money, which they'd had a big summer of live concerts, and one of our 2 arenas had started paying business rates for the first time. They took a chunk of that money and went, right, okay, we're going to do something about it to fix that specific problem. They also recognise that councils can move quite slowly, and MVT moves quite quickly.
Yeah.
We're probably best placed to distribute that because we're one of the few organisations that's got an aspect of funding already written into what we do. So we're going to be distributing it. So it's £245,000 specifically to fix that particular problem. They've done it in a really elegant way. Ta-da!
Amazing. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure that's made such a massive impact on all of those venues. I feel like it makes sense to really give credit to all the right people that made that happen.
Yeah, I can absolutely talk about that. So within Manchester City Council, Sarah Elderkin, Policy and Culture, Dave Moutry, who's the Director of Culture, and specifically Councillor Bev Craig, who's the leader of the council. They're the orchestrators of this piece of work.
Amazing. I mean, it's so progressive. It's so brilliant. And I hope it's something that can be rolled out, to the other areas as well.
And our friends, at Manchester Music City, Brighter Sound, and The Hub, who wrote that report and crafted those recommendations. Yeah.
So it's quite rare to see such strong alignment between local government and venue operators. And I guess I'm kind of wondering what's made it work so well in Manchester, do you think?
Well, when I was a younger promoter, this was all I wanted. I wanted people in the grassroots sector to have a voice and be able to have meaningful conversations with people who impacted on policy and could support the work we did. And so a bit of, me sitting here today is me kind of driving that for myself over decades. But it's about people having meaningful conversations with the right people and the will, the ambition, the appetite to actually do something progressive. Also, in Manchester's case, it'd be a bit weird if people didn't recognise the position that music has in the fabric of that city and how important it is.
Yeah.
Even culturally, socially, economically. It's a bit odd if we don't recognise just how important that thing is and what would happen to Manchester if that thing was removed. So I think it's probably quite easy to have those meaningful conversations there. As Lloyd said earlier, probably is a little harder in other places that aren't just these big, massive cultural behemoths like Manchester. What do you think about Sheffield?
Well, I just think not just Sheffield, but all over the place, there is a general trend for people who run venues to have more of an appetite to engage with the powers that be, I suppose. And also part of that comes from the venues themselves recognising that they've got a valid voice that the council should care about, as opposed to just being, oh, that's just Bob down the road who runs that dump that bands sometimes play in. Right? It's instead being like, no, we run a really valuable cultural business and the council ought to listen to what we have to say because what we say reflects the opinions of the people to whom we matter. So
I think that there's been a massive shift because obviously, I was a promoter back in the day as well, like we all were. And, you just didn't feel like you had a right to talk to the local council. You didn't think that you were important enough or that you were doing anything of any value to them. And I think that whole conversation has shifted massively now.
Or understood the people who might be the right person to speak to in your
totally.
authority. I mean, a bit of the Manchester Music in the City report. There's a series of recommendations that are all we'd all be really happy with. We are really happy with. But one of those things is about improving that dialogue and about people understanding who in their local council does what and how best to have a conversation with them. That I think people's knee-jerk reaction in Manchester is right to the mayor because the mayor is big and the mayor's everywhere. And actually, there are people within the council you can actually have very meaningful conversations with in specific roles who have culture in their portfolio, things like that. So a bit of that report does recognise that there needs to be a firmer dialogue and a bit of a better understanding about how to have those conversations.
I think another big thing is like identifying the people within the council who are into the venues in their spare time and things and who are likely to have a sympathetic attitude. Because there was a case that I'm familiar with where a venue was struggling with noise complaints. They eventually got a face-to-face meeting with the EHO. Turns out the EHO's son goes to that venue. Suddenly they've got this like quite human connection, and they just
people might not know what an EHO is.
Environmental health officer, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
they're often the people who investigate things like noise complaints for councils, and it's to do with the environment of the venue and its impact on its surroundings. So, this venue in particular was dealing with a fairly hostile situation regarding noise, and the venue in the EHO met up, realised that they were all people and with common ground and things, and now the relationship's really good, and the complaints have subsided and everything's just a lot better. So I think often you kind of forget that people who work in the council are like normal people who might well actually come to your venue in their spare time, and might have a vested interest in the well-being of music venues. And so it's not just a case of venues deciding that they ought to speak to councils. It's sometimes realising actually it can be quite a positive and beneficial experience.
Definitely. I think maybe I'm wondering if you're a venue, who might be important people to identify in a council?
Licensing, planning,
Licensing,
HO.
planning, environmental health officer.
Yeah.
But you were saying from someone from
Well, there might be
cultural.
not every council's got a culture strategy, but a lot of them will. And somebody's written it. Often a group of people have written it. I think the key thing is probably a lot of venues we've seen venues have no engagement until there's a problem, and then suddenly they have to spring to action. I would encourage having a meaningful conversation and an understanding with them people from the get-go, and just kind of get in touch with them and say, actually, we'd love to invite you down to the venue to talk about the work you do. Quite often when there is a culture strategy around nighttime or place, some of the things the venue are doing are meeting those goals. They're part of that solution. They should probably have a conversation with the people who've written that thing to say, actually, I'm doing that work that's meeting those goals that you've written in your local piece of work.
Awesome. I mean, it's amazing what's happened in Manchester, and it sounds like a blueprint other cities could learn from.
Yeah.
We discussed a little bit earlier whether you think that this model could be replicated elsewhere in England, but it seems like it could be tricky outside of cities.
It doesn't have to be replicated, but it can be used as a bit of an inspiration, I suppose. Like the very basic facets of it, which are interactions with councils, cooperative work between people. That's pretty standard and can exist anywhere. I think so. Yeah, it's not. Manchester is very different to a village in North Yorkshire or Margate or something, anywhere else. But the general principles that have informed the actions are the same everywhere. And then you just apply that to where you live and where you know. Because you're usually your own best expert in many ways.
Thank you. That's a really powerful message. Collaboration instead of confrontation, I guess, is the key. But, look, I guess the national picture and looking ahead, between the two of you, you're covering a lot of ground, from crisis prevention to council engagement. Looking ahead, what are your main priorities for the next few months?
What's on your plate, Lloyd?
Do you have time to plan, or is it just all
there are
reactive work?
There are some things underway, aren't there? There's the venue MOT idea, which Jay can maybe explain.
Yeah, it's a project we're working on, which is going to help venues audit their operations. So every part of it. Is that funny?
I'm laughing because it's not sexy, is it?
It's not sexy at all. But it's going to have really meaningful implications for venues across the whole of the UK, where venues will be able to kind of audit their operations, look at their bar profits, look at their show costings, look at all manner of things in terms of how they operate day to day, and try and kind of, often it's quite a micro level, find ways of tweaking it that are going to make them more sustainable and profitable. It's quite a big piece of work, but hopefully it'll be a kind of one-stop shop for kind of auditing what they already do, and just being able to kind of make a better version, a more sustainable version of it.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's really good.
I guess the idea is to sort of streamline the unsexy nuts and bolts aspect of things to give people more time to do the fun bits.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for anyone that didn't know, we were talking about what a nice, sexy ending would be. That's why I laughed, because we went straight into MOT. But it's important work, you know, and it has to be done, and it will make a big difference to a lot of venues. And I guess there's also the Ethical Venues project as well, which is all about getting venues to be able to communicate their values, which will be really helpful in terms of like funding applications and also just connecting better with their communities.
Yeah.
So just thank you so much for showing up today and, you know, talking with me more about what your work is, you know, what you've been doing for the last 3 months. It's lovely to have you on the podcast. And, you know, just as a bit of a final segment, you know, if you want to support our work, we've got the Supporters Circle where from £5 a month you can literally fund the venue support team to make sure that their really essential work is happening. And, you know, every new member makes our safety net so much stronger. You know, so we're very grateful to all the supporters that we have already, which I think is, you know, at least 250, which is amazing. And we'll include links below for that. And thank you so much for watching this episode of The Last Safe Space. Please support your local music venue and let's keep the lights on.